Welcome to an AAHRPP educational session on applying for accreditation. AAHRPP offers a day-long workshop at our annual conference on how to apply for accreditation. In 2020, because of the COVID-19 public health emergency, we are providing this conference workshop through a series of videos. In recognition of these unusual circumstances, we are providing these videos free as a resource to the community. We are extremely grateful for our presenters from the conference, who were excited to move forward and provide education through videos. We thank all of them for generously devoting their time and extensive experience. I will now turn it over to Nichelle Cobb from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and Delia Wolf-Christiani from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health.
Hello, everyone. I am Delia Wolf-Christiani. As a part of my disclosure, I am an AAHRPP site visitor. So the objectives of today's talk, we are going to talk about what to do and what not to do before, during, and after AAHRPP site visit. Please remember, this presentation is from site visitors' perspective. I'll start with the first part, and Nichelle will speak on during a site visit and after the site visit, focusing on preparing for responses to the site visit report. Before we jump into do's and don'ts, I would like to touch upon the purpose of the site visit. So why AAHRPP conducts site visit? Well, for those of you have submitted step 1 application or in the process of preparing for step 1 application, you realize that step 1 is all about policies and procedures on paper. So the purpose of the step 2 or site visit is to be on site to verify how institutional policies and procedures are implemented in practice. For example, how components of AAHRPP work together and communicate. So the components such as IRB, operations, investigators, quality improvement program, conflict of interest committee, grants and contracts, technology development, etc. All these components, how they communicate in real life. And then also how conflict of interest committees, they communicate its decision to the IRB, and how provisions relating to subject injury in clinical trials agreement get incorporated into consent documents. And another example, if your policy indicates a monthly AAHRPP newsletter will be sent to the research community, and the site visitor will ask the interviewees whether you have received such newsletter. And as you can see, the site visitor's job is to make sure what's submitted to AAHRPP during step 1 review are reflected in their daily practices. In other words, the site visitors are in fact, they are the fact finders. They do not make decisions, but rather make recommendations to AAHRPP Council regarding whether standards are met based on information they gathered on site via interviews with site personnel and record review during preparation for site visit. Now you have successfully passed step 1 review and get a clear from AAHRPP to submit your step 2 application. So which means on paper, you met AAHRPP standards. And here comes the first do's. First, please do assemble a site visit readiness team as early as possible. Ideally, right after your submission of your step 2 application. And make sure that all key personnel listed on AAHRPP form are aware of their role as listed in the official policy relevant to their roles and responsibility. So if multiple people are responsible for same or similar activities, gather these people together to make sure everyone is on the same page. So remember, this is also an opportunity to improve and strengthen your AHRPP. So take advantage of this opportunity. And then after you assemble this readiness team, you need to get people into the mood and keep that momentum going by having regular check-ins, especially after the site visit agenda is finalized. The next do is to identify and execute an education strategy. So you should really use this AAHRPP site visit as an opportunity to educate the research community about institutional AAHRPP policies and procedures. And you will be surprised how much you can learn and everyone can learn. So for example, for IRB members, and even though they do have meetings, they talk about a conflict of interest management plan, but maybe nobody really clear about who has the final saying on conflict of interest management plan. So this is the time you review with the members and they are clear. And for investigators, even though they do report to the IRB, but what is the difference between unanticipated problems and a serious adverse event? And for department chairs, sometimes they sign off on submissions to the IRB. And so what do their signatures mean? Sometimes some institutions, that means they did a scientific review, right? So everyone should be on the same page. They really understand what the role they play. And also develop education materials, AKA cheat sheet, such as FAQs to distribute to different groups and offices. And for example, some reporting requirements for investigators and study staff, and ancillary review procedures for relevant offices, and who does what within IRB operations. So this is not cheating. I would call it a focused education. So there are questions site visitor will be asking during site visit, and people should know the answers. If not, here's your opportunity to educate them. And also sometimes, even though people do the work right, but never thought about policies behind it. For example, investigators routinely report to IRB some reportable new information as soon as he or she becomes aware, but they're not aware that the institutional policy says within 5 days. So by reviewing those questions and give answers, it helps. So do keep in mind who would be interviewed. So this is a list of people on the key personnel list that could be selected by AAHRPP to be interviewed. If you are gathering a readiness team before receiving the draft site visit agenda from AAHRPP, you should consider include them. Remember, this is an opportunity for education and communication among various components of AAHRPP. Although please note, title can be misleading sometimes. Therefore, please make sure the persons listed are really AAHRPP wanted. What does that mean? It's AAHRPP wanted. So do work with AAHRPP to finalize the site visit agenda. So contact AAHRPP if personnel selected to be interviewed by AAHRPP do not have an HRPP roles as their title suggested. So for example, the Director of Compliance should be someone who is responsible for human research compliance, not corporate compliance. So as I mentioned, making sure they are AAHRPP wanted, that means AAHRPP wanted to interview someone who is the really Director of Compliance is for human subjects research, not for corporate compliance, even though the title may say compliance. That's why you want to make sure this is really related to HRPP. And sometimes also, we noticed that pharmacy representative could be someone involved in control of investigational drugs, and or someone provides input on drug used in research studies, but not necessary if there's someone, just for clinical pharmacy, has nothing to do with research drugs, then it's not what AAHRPP wanted. And also, as soon as you know the site visit date, have key AAHRPP personnel and place hold on their agenda, on their calendar, which can be narrowed as the site visit interview agenda becomes finalized. This is very important. You do prepare interviewees. As you receive a site visit agenda, you should prepare them as soon as possible. As I mentioned earlier, preparing for a site visit is your opportunity to not only improve your AAHRPP, but also educate everyone involved. And so you consider to set up an individual or small group session with interviewees to provide an overview of accreditation, what to expect, and more importantly, answer their questions. And also test their knowledge or refresh their memory by asking specific questions. So these are the list of questions you can ask. Of course, you can, it's only examples. So what's the difference between adverse event and unanticipated problems involving risk to participants and others? So that, especially for not only investigators, but also IRB members. And who has the final authority to approve conflict of interest management plan, and who decides whether a particular incidence of non-compliance is serious or continuing, and who can suspend research, and who has the ultimate authority to the AAHRPP. Do set up site visitor records access and label records clearly. So you want to make sure this, determine that how records will be accessed by site visitors. So especially sometimes you have part of them, they will be a paper version, part of them will be electronically. So you set up site visitor access to records. If it's electronically, you need logins and a password, and you have to identify designated person to train site visitors on record review system and in advance. And ensure that site visitors can map the records pulled, whether the paper or electronic, just basically label them clearly, especially for like one, they have 1A, 1B, or 2A, 2B, all these, if it's paper or electronic, please label them clearly. And for contracts and consent forms, remember there will be provisions that needs to be matched. So that's therefore, if you could highlight those relevant provisions, it will make things a lot easier for site visitors to go through. Next, do ensure technology needed for site visit is in place, which means if some of your interviews will be conducted remotely, you want to set up the teleconferencing or web conferencing properly or in advance. And if it's interviews in person, then make sure that site visitors will have internet access to outside websites and can plug in their personal laptops when they are working on site. The next, do ensure that key logistics are considered. For in-person site visits, make sure the site visitors receive the directions, and also, all those logistics about access to the building. And if you have a front desk, make sure the security, they have their site visitors' names, and it will be always helpful to have name tags, but that's all depending on your local structure or requirements. And then also, it's also helpful if you can set up a staging area for interviewees arrive and debrief after meeting with the site visitors. So people, they may be nervous, and they, if they can come a little earlier, and even after the site visit, they want to chat about it, you have a designated area for people to do so. So now we're talking about if your site visit is a virtual site visit, these are some key logistics that should be considered. And before you even start, you want to select the best one to fit your needs or and your resources. And you have to identify a web conferencing platform. So nowadays, you have a lot of them to choose from, but try to pick one you feel most comfortable. And then also, if you choose one of them, you want to make sure that they have the functions such as breakout rooms, and it's available and it's all set up, because site visitors, they do need time to just convene among themselves. And also identify how site visitors will access records, including whether it will need to be placed in the document share platforms such as Dropbox and Google Docs, etc. And all these needs to be done in advance. And this is, you're almost ready, but do make a final check before the site visit. You want to confirm, and for in-person meetings, so who will greet the site visitors, and what time, and what if they arrive a little earlier, and who will be attending the introduction and program review sessions. Please note that the organizational official is not required to attend, but maybe it's not only helpful, but also, make these people aware this another opportunity to show how important it is. So, depends on your situation or locally, and you have to decide, but just know it's not required. And what kind of technology will be used for presentation. And also, you want to make sure that testing, meeting technology, and record access may require a pre-meeting with the AAHRPP staff and site visitors for virtual meetings. Now, if you do all the do's, there's not much left for don'ts, because you have done all the right things. Well, the following list of don'ts is pretty straightforward, especially after what we have just discussed. So number one, do not wait for the site visit agenda from AAHRPP to prepare for site visit. Remember, we did say, do assemble a readiness team as soon as you complete step 1 review, or as soon as you receive step 2, submit your step 2 application. And do not make attendance optional for selected interviewees. This is important as it needs institutional support from the leadership, ideally the organizational official. If she or he can send an email to all selected interviewees and tell them it's mandatory for them to participate. Of course, if you have a justified reason, we can, deal with this case by case, but you have to set the bar higher. And avoid sending large group emails if the message requires individual attention. As we all know, group emails may get deleted. So an individual email will not only get people's attention, but also establish some kind of connection, a personal conversation. Therefore, do not underestimate the efficiency and power of individual communication, especially one-on-one. And last but not least, do not hesitate to contact AAHRPP if you have any questions. Please remember, AAHRPP accreditation is not a regulatory audit. It's to promote best practice. So AAHRPP is always there to help you. And so please do not waste this opportunity, and do take advantage of that.
My name is Nichelle Cobb, and I will talk through the do's and don'ts during and after a site visit, whether the site visit is in person or virtual. I am an AAHRPP site visitor and council member, and I'm also the director of Smart IRB operations. Site visits work on tight timelines, so it's important to be prepared and have backup plans in place to address last-minute changes or unexpected problems. Helping the site visitors settle in quickly provides a great start to a site visit. For in-person visits, for example, make sure it's clear when and where site visitors should meet an organizational representative on the first day, especially if the site visitors need to obtain visitor badges or go through other processes to access the building or the room where their site visit will be. For on-site visits, make sure the site visitors have a home base, and this home base should have access to the internet, wall plugs to plug in their laptops, near bathroom facilities, and at least some water available for the site visitors. Things come up, so in case there are problems with site visitors' travel, if it's an in-person visit, or to online technology, if it's going to be a virtual visit, ensure the site visitors know whom to contact and that contact is readily available to respond if the site visitors make an outreach. The site visit, whether it's in person or virtual, includes an opportunity for organizations to provide an overview. It's HRPP. This is why it's important to leverage the program overview session. So the site visitors have read the materials that you've provided ahead of time, including that step 2 application and meeting minutes, but the program overview session provides an excellent opportunity for you to highlight any unique practices, such as an IRB serving as a conflict of interest committee as well, any changes you've made since the submission of materials to AAHRPP, like if you've made any changes since the Step 2 application or since your prior accreditation visit, and especially if those changes were made in response to the accreditation site visit. Another thing that is helpful to highlight is any unique organizational relationships or any affiliate institutions that maybe not undergoing that accreditation, but might actually have a role or a relationship with the Human Research Protection Program, such as the pharmacy in an affiliated hospital that isn't undergoing accreditation because it's a separate entity. So some organizations prepare formal presentations and they even prepare handouts for the program overview session, but this is not required. For example, some organizations have prepared information about any changes they've made since the last visit, especially if they had some areas of concern and how they've met those areas of concerns and maybe even improved on those areas of concerns. So you can decide to do the formal presentation and handouts, but as I said before, it's not required. Now, the program overview session is often a case that right after site visitors may actually ask some questions about organizational structure or certain aspects of the Step 2 application. So it's really helpful to ensure that people who are in the overview session are those who might be able to answer some broad questions about the organization. So another thing to keep in mind is to remain organized and available. So it's really important to follow the site visit agenda. That agenda was developed in conjunction with AAHRPP to allow the site visitors to be able to talk to key individuals in the organization's HRPP to confirm these organizational practices and to allow sufficient time for records review, which is why following this agenda is so important. However, we know and AAHRPP knows that sometimes things come up and you just can't anticipate that they're going to happen. So for example, there are cases where something can come up in an interviewee's life and they can't make the interview at all, or they thought they would be in person, but they now have to do this remotely. So this is something to have plans for, but if this comes up, just communicate this to the site team leader as soon as possible in case there need to be adjustments to the agenda or to whom the site visitors may need to talk to get some answers to certain questions they may have. In addition, it's just critical that site visitors can quickly contact someone at the site if they have questions or need access to additional records. For on-site visits, this is often easier to do, and sometimes there needs to be a channel of communication for virtual site visits of who they can reach out to if they have a question about a record or need an additional record. And for the records review component, it's really critical to provide site visitors with an overview of how to use the system if they're accessing the system directly. And even if they're not accessing the system directly, how have you organized those records? So many sites will produce cheat sheets for visitors to refer to, especially if the visitors are using the electronic system that the site uses, or even just to show the particular organization of where to find things in a particular AAHRPP record, or where to find them in the storage place where the site has put the records for the site visitors to review. Regardless of the format, it's also helpful to have somebody available who can help the site visitors find a particular record. For example, they might be looking for a review template or a checklist or some documentation. So somebody who's knowledgeable and can walk the site visitors through to where in the record it would be is extremely helpful. And if the site visitors are using an electronic system and there are technical difficulties, it's really helpful to have somebody who can help troubleshoot the technical challenges available if those challenges arise. As Delia mentioned, it's really good to have space to debrief individuals for interviews who have undergone these interviews. And one of the things is that they often will show up early to a site visit. So having a place for them to go so that they can get ready for the site visit and not interrupt the current interviews is really important. But this is also important afterwards, whether it's an on-site or virtual site visit, for these interviewees to actually convey what were the kind of questions that they were asked about. It gives you a sense of what the site visitors might be asking about. Also help you identify any potential gaps if there was some confusion and the interviewees might say, well, they asked me this and I didn't know the answer to it. There's an educational opportunity at that moment. The other thing is that AAHRPP is really intends for these to be friendly site visits. As Delia said, these are not regulatory site visits. So if there's something amiss that the interviewees did not feel that the interview went well, or that there was some challenge with how the site visitors conducted the interview, it's very important for AAHRPP to hear that, and this is also an opportunity to get that kind of feedback. So the other part of an important part of the site visit is the closeout session. There's really two types of closeout sessions. There's the official closeout session, and there's really something that's referred to as the end of day session. This end of day session is a time that is very short, and it allows the site visitors really a chance to confirm logistics with the organization and identify anything that they might need for the next day. And so for the nature of the end of day session, it only needs to be one person or a couple people available to answer the questions, not a large number of folks, which is something that you might consider for the final closeout. So the final closeout is when the site visitors go through any areas of concern that have been identified. There are cases, though, where there will be no concerns identified by the site visitors, which can make for a very short closeout session. But it's important for the organizations to decide who they want to attend the closeout session. Some organizations invite a wide range of people from their AAHRPP to attend, while others decide a smaller group's appropriate and might have somebody like the AAHRPP director and maybe even the organizational official with a few additional staff. It's up to you as an organization to determine who you want there. And many organizations use this as an opportunity for people to hear the messaging, especially if they think things went really well. It's a chance for them to celebrate and appreciate their AAHRPP staff. If there are some concerns that are coming up and they want key people to hear those concerns, then it might be important to invite those individuals. Most site visitors make it very clear through conversations with folks throughout the day and at the lead contact review what is going to happen at the closeout session. So there's really an opportunity for the organization to try to gauge who they want to attend that closeout session based on those conversations. And increasingly, a lot of organizations are combining that lead contact review with the closeout session because many organizations just think it's important for everybody who was involved in the organization of the site visit to hear the information that the site visitors will provide. So at the closeout, the site visitors present their version of the draft site visit report. And this is the document that will be submitted to AAHRPP. As Delia noted, the site visit is to confirm that in the what was written in policies and procedures is in fact happening in practice. And so it may be that there are things that are not being, that may be being done, like outreach activities, but maybe they're not being evaluated, and AAHRPP expects them to be evaluated. So the site visitors might say an area of concern was, although the organization conducted outreach activities to community, they did not conduct evaluation and make improvements based on those. And that would be something that would be discussed at the closeout visit and would appear in the written report. Now, it may be something that when that written report goes to AAHRPP, they look at it and they talk with the site visitors, because they might notice something and say, well, maybe this could be tweaked in terms of language, or maybe they felt that there was other evidence that the evaluation happened. They may alter the findings of the report. It doesn't happen that often, but there's that possibility. So as Delia mentioned, for her don'ts for getting ready for the site visit, there's a few don'ts for during the site visit. One of the things that can create some tension is that this site visits are peer-driven processes. So often the folks that come to visit your institution may actually know individuals at your institution, and you really want to make the site visitors feel comfortable. The site visit is, even though it's friendly, you do not have obligations and certainly should not expect to socialize with the site visitors, pay for their meals, or provide them with gifts. That's not part of the site visit. It's a professional interaction, and even though it's friendly, the site visitors are expected to be as objective as possible about the site visit. The other, perhaps even more important point of a don't is, don't feel like you can't disagree with a site visitor or correct their understanding. One of the things about site visits is they're short and sweet. And so although the site visitors have worked really hard to understand your organization, both through reading the materials and talking to folks, sometimes they might not have asked the question to get at a key piece of information, or maybe the person who could have provided information wasn't available or wasn't part of the individuals listed. So if you think that the site visitors have missed something, or think that talk to you about a potential area of concern, and you think that there's additional information available to them to show that in fact you do have a practice, maybe you do evaluate outreach and you just hadn't seen that and you didn't understand quite what they were looking for, you are more than welcome to have that conversation with them. And in fact, I think that's really important. I often think about site visits as similar to an IRB review process, where often the IRB will review something, provide some feedback to a research team, and often research teams will say, but I just don't think they understood what I was trying to say. And IRBs will want the research teams to come back and correct and say, no, you missed this. This is actually not an issue because of this. Same thing for a site visit. So don't hesitate to work with the site visitors if you think that they have misunderstood or did not get a complete picture of your practices. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about after the site visit. After the site visit, we hope the organizations take a moment to congratulate themselves on the hard work they've done before they plunge into working on any responses to the site visit report that they're going to receive. But there's often a chance to start working on these responses so that it makes the response to the site visit report, which you should know at the closeout what that will be in the nature of the areas of concern. So you might want to start working on responses as soon as possible, based on what the site visitors have presented during the closeout session, and especially if they happen to be significant. So some things will take some time, and as you may know that the site visit report will come 30 days after the site visit, and you'll have time to respond to that after, but there's some things that may take a little longer. So for example, If you have, we'll continue with our example of the outreach. So say that you had an area of concern that you did not conduct outreach to the community and evaluate and make improvements. And yes, your organization realizes that that's something that you could improve upon. That's something that may actually take a bit of time to put together and gather some different individuals from different components of the organization to have a conversation about what's right for your organization, what kind of activities you want to do, and what's the way that you want to actually evaluate those activities. And you may also need to have some conversations with AAHRPP about, what your ideas are. So take some time to pause and think about it, but then get to work as soon as possible on things that might take some time to address. And this might also include things like a new template or new checklists or revised checklists. So those things that might take some time to put together are ones that may be worth working on sooner rather than later. The other thing, which I think you've gotten the message from both Delia and myself, is that this is meant to be a supportive, friendly site visit, and AAHRPP takes its role in providing guidance to organizations quite seriously. They have a host of very friendly, thoughtful, and responsive people. And so if you don't receive your report by the time frame you're thinking the final site visit report, contact them. If you have a question about the findings in the report or disagree with it, talk it through with them. And one of the other things that AAHRPP will want is that they'll send you a survey to provide feedback about the site visit. And they really want that feedback because just like organizations are expected to evaluate and make improvements of their activities, AAHRPP does that as well, and it takes that quite seriously. Some of the things that after a site visit that you can't do is that the site visitors, when they've left your site, can't reach out to them about the site visit. That's where working with AAHRPP comes in, is after the site visit. And also, one of the things is that if you do not understand or agree with what was in the site report, make sure you talk through what your response will be with AAHRPP before you submit it and before you make any changes. So AAHRPP, again, can help walk you through. So I hope you found these helpful. I'm going to turn it back over to Robert to take us out.
Thank you to Nichelle and Delia. We really appreciate your excellent support for human participant protections and AAHRPP during this difficult time. This concludes this presentation, but please check our website for other videos in our pre-conference series on applying for accreditation.